this is Kyle, also known as AlienTude, reviewing today this 18C made by Chris Fields of Sterling Armory. Now, if you're familiar with my channel, you have probably seen me use this sword before because this has been my competition cutting longsword since I bought it in 2023. And I haven't got around to reviewing it. Now I'm finally getting a chance to do that. So I bought this sword at SoCal Sword Fight in 2023 for around $1,150. That was a bit of a discount because Chris had made it and brought it to Combat Con in 2022, and it was at its normal price and nobody bought it there. So when he brought it to SoCal Sword Fight, he knocked it down a little bit and I couldn't pass it up at that price. Now, if you wanted a sword similar to this from Chris, if he made one of these, my guess is the price now would probably be around $1,300 to $1,400. I don't know that for sure, just my guesstimate. You could always ask Chris directly. He's very active on Facebook, and maybe he'd be interested in making one of these for you. Not something exactly like this, but something similar. Maybe not. He makes what he wants to make, and he does some commissions, but not a ton of commissions. Anyways, so this is the sword that I have used for my competition cutting for 2 years now. I'm moving to a different one for my next competition. Doesn't mean this one's out of commission. I very well could switch back to this. It's kind of up in the air. I'm going to decide before each competition what sword I'm going to use. But because I've cut quite a bit of tatami with this sword, I've used it quite a bit, there are definite signs of use and staining, especially staining on the blade. Tatami, some batches of tatami don't stain much at all. Others are more acidic and they stain quickly. At least one batch that this sword did cut some of was very acidic and it took quite a bit of staining on there. I've since cleaned that up to a degree, and then I've cut more tatami with it so that staining it's there and it would take a lot of work to clean it up, and it really doesn't bother me because it's a sign of use, and that's what this sword is for. In addition, the grip has some wear on it. I'll get into that during the hilt section. So this is a Type 18C sword. Now, the most famous 18 sword in the reproduction market is the Albion Principe. And those are very different blades. This one and that are very different styles of 18C. The Principe starts wider and has more profile taper throughout the blade, whereas this one starts a little bit less wide, but it doesn't have a ton of profile taper until it gets out towards past the point of percussion, really. It has a little bit before there, but it's definitely a different style of 18C. Now, 18C swords were a very late medieval, early Renaissance style of sword. There wasn't a ton of them from what I've seen. I believe the majority, if not all of them, were found in the Alexandria arsenal. I am not a historian, so I'm not positive on that. There's a very famous one at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and that's the one that the Albion Alexandria is based off of. There's also one at, I think it's a Philadelphia museum. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'll put it up on screen here. And it's one that's a little bit of a different profile also. It's got more of a triangular shape to the blade overall than either the Principe or this one. And to my eye, it looks more like the Balor Arms Alexandria sword that is the modern reproduction that looks like it's inspired by that blade shape. So there's a variety of blade shapes that an 18C style sword could have. And which one's best, I think it really doesn't matter. They're all good and they're all purpose-built for cutting. Now, they're all also effective thrusters, but with a very wide blade and pretty thin profile, especially out towards the cutting section. These are most certainly cutting-focused swords, and in the modern reproduction market, that is especially true. 18Cs are, in some ways, considered cheat codes, especially the Principe. I know there's rumors and things that say that it's been banned from competitions. I am not aware of any competitions that it has been banned from, but I'm not aware of every single competition out there. And even though they aid in cutting, they are not the end-all be-all, and they do not make up for poor technique, which you will see during the cutting section later. Let's take a look at the individual components of the sword, starting with the hilt. We have here the pommel, which both the pommel and the guard are made from stainless steel. The pommel is kind of a V2 oakshot pommel, kind of a V3. I'd probably lean more towards V3. It's also kind of like a flattened scent stopper. It doesn't fit perfectly into any of those, but it looks absolutely historically inspired. Looks absolutely like there could be a historical sword with this style of pommel. Every single corner is chamfered over very beautifully. There's absolutely no hot spots anywhere, and it really allows me to, I can grip it and it's very comfortable. I can also it keeps my offhand from sliding down too much. It's very crisp, very clean lines. The peen is solid. It's a good size, robust peen. It could be cleaned up more, but it's not a big deal. The finish on the pommel is basically a satin. It's got some grind lines visible, but looks very nice overall. I actually really like this pommel. It was one of the things that actually drew me to this sword, other than actually everything. But I do really like this pommel. I think Chris's fishtail pommels, which I would call this a fishtail pommel, I think they are outstanding. They're always super comfortable. They look great. The grip has this really beautiful blue dye on it, and the leather work is impeccable. Chris, again, this is going to be something I'm going to be saying throughout here. The attention to detail on this sword, the details, the fit and finish, all outstanding. Chris Fields does superb work. I've reviewed a good number of his swords at this point, and it is a common theme throughout these reviews that I really appreciate his swords. The grip shape I really like on this. It's got a very flat surface throughout, and then it's curved in. It's got another mostly flat surface on either end, and then these curves are perfectly ergonomic for my hands. It really fits my hands very well, and it locks into my hand very well. The cord texture is a little bit rougher than I'm used to, but that's because of the use that I've put this sword through. If you look, I'm sure you'll see on some of these close-ups, the cord has rubbed in, the texture is rubbed and a little bit raw in a few places. The dye has rubbed off a little bit. And overall, it's got a well-used look and feel to it, but it actually still feels outstanding. I love the way it feels. The look is still great too. Sure, it would be nice to have the dye be uniform, but honestly, it just means that the sword's been used, so it doesn't bother me. The important thing is that this grip is super functional. I love the way it feels in my hand. The crossguard is quite simple, closest to a Type 1, I would say, but Type 1 would usually be a rectangular cross-section, whereas this is hexagonal. So it's definitely, it's closest, I would say, is Type 1 because it's perfectly straight, but it's got some flair to it there. It's thicker here, has some taper in towards the tips of the quillins, has these decorative grooves cut into each end. And the finish on it is just like the pommel. It's a satin with a few grind lines visible. Everything is, again, chamfered beautifully. It is super comfortable. I can absolutely wrap a finger around it to finger the blade, which works because there is a blunt section right there. It's an outstanding guard. It is rock solid. It feels good. It looks good. The fit where it meets the blade is excellent. I've seen Chris do better, but I've seen plenty of makers do worse also, especially even at this price point. It's very closely fit to the blade with some very small gaps. Now it's time to talk about the business end, the blade. As usual, here's my measurements. So you can see that the blade has a good amount of distal taper in it, especially in the first foot or so. It has a lot of distal taper there. It starts considerably thicker than it gets in that first 12 inches. And then the distal taper definitely slows down a little bit. So this is nonlinear distal taper, and this is pretty typical for Chris Fields' work. From what I've seen, all his blades have a short blunt section right in the at the base of the blade, as well as this triangular section, which he chooses to bring out. A lot of swords will have that hidden basically in the crossguard and tang. Chris likes to put it out on the blade, but it's going to be there regardless. It's just a choice he makes to make the sword more distinct, and it's kind of a calling card of his that you can see that there. The finish on the blade is satin. There's a good number of grind lines visible. This is a very normal finish for Chris Fields. It's not super smooth like Albion. It's good. It's not quite as smooth as them, but it still looks good, especially from a distance. You can't tell at all. You really have to get close to notice some of those grind lines. The center ridge has a tiny bit of wobble to it, and there is a little bit of rippling across the surface. This is actually very normal from what I've seen on blades with this style of pretty flat cross section. My theory here is that there's not as much material to smooth out and even that out because it's so flat. There's not a ton of thickness to grind away. Just my hunch there, but it's very, very minor. And comparing it to the Albion Principe, for instance, I see the same thing on there. Has definitely some slight ripples on it. So I think this style of blade, that's a more common thing. Again, my hunch there. The distal taper, like I said, it starts pretty thick, tapers beautifully out towards the tip, and then the tip is, I won't say it's reinforced, but it is a little bit beefier than you would think if just looking at the distal taper. So it's got some meat to the tip, which I like to see. And it's, again, something that Chris Fields oftentimes does on his acute point swords because he likes to have that slightly beefier tip. Now, this is not the edge that Chris put on it. It was sharp enough to cut tatami, no doubt, right from Chris. In fact, I competed with it at the event that I bought it from him, so it was still the same sharpness there. And it definitely can cut tatami at Chris's level of sharpness. There's no doubt Chris puts a very effective edge on his swords. But I did have it sharpened by my friend Ryan, and that really did bring it to that hair-popping sharpness. Now, since I have cut with it a good amount, it really could use another touch-up. And that's one of the reasons I'm probably moving on to a different sword for now. I don't know if I will probably bring this to another competition at some point because I really enjoy cutting with this sword. But for right now, it definitely could use a slight touch-up. That's not to say it's not still very sharp. It absolutely is sharp enough to compete with. But I have noticed when I'm cutting, I will sometimes see the strings in the tatami. I'll see it pull them rather than cut them cleanly. That's my kind of one of the things I look for when I know it needs a touch-up. My hunch is this really pretty much probably just needs a stropping to get it back to where it needs to be. And like I mentioned before, there are flaws in the finish now. There's a lot of staining, and I've used some metal polish and cleaned it up once, but then I've cut with it again, more staining, some black spots here and there. There's no damage to the sword, but it is definitely used. I don't mind it. It's a sign of use. And if you're going to cut tatami with the sword, especially if you're going to cut a lot of tatami with the sword, you are going to get stains on there. It's just, there's no way around that. And that brings us to cutting. Now, this has been my competition cutter for 2 years. I think we all know how well it cuts. But like I said earlier, it does not make up for poor technique. I'm going to be putting the footage of the various times I've competed with the sword up on screen while I'm talking a little bit. And there are failed cuts in there. And those are my fault, not the sword's. In fact, my worst performance with the sword was at Fright Fight last year, where I did okay on the 6 basic cuts, but then the second round was semaphores and I did not get a single cut. That was my bad technique, not the sword's. So even when you have a sword that is this capable of cutting tatami, it will still not just do all the work for you. You still need to put in the correct technique to be able to get good cuts. If you don't do that, you might get through, but if your technique is bad enough, it is not going to cut the tatami. That is on the wielder to do. When this sword is used properly, it slices through tatami with ease, gives a really clean cut, and is just a joy to cut with. And frankly, I'm going to shut up now and let you watch some more cutting footage. And this is going to be a much longer than normal cutting section because I've done a lot of cutting. Feel free to use the chapter markers to skip ahead anytime you want. So, how does this 18C from Sterling Armory handle? Well, the fact that since I bought this in 2023, it has been my competition cutter should answer at least some of that. It handles amazing. I love the way this sword feels. It is absolutely usable in one hand, even though I almost never do move it around one-handed. It is shockingly nimble one-handed. And when you put that second hand on, oh, I love the way this sword moves around. This shouldn't be a surprise to you if you've seen my other reviews of Sterling Armory swords. Chris Fields is a master at making swords feel amazing, feel like they want to move and swing very nicely. You can see it is balanced pretty close to the hilt, 2.5, 3 inches, somewhere around there. Let's look at the flex. So based on just that alone, you can tell it's got a good amount of distal taper to it. Most of the blade stays pretty robust and then it tapers there. Again, should not be a surprise if you're familiar at all with Chris Fields' work. The center of percussion is exactly where I want it. Right before the blade starts getting thinner. Frankly, the profile taper is very minor up to this point, and right after it starts tapering in a little bit more. But that center of percussion, that's where you want to cut, and it is in an ideal spot on this sword. And the hilt node is perfectly placed in my hand. I can't even really feel the vibrations at all there. Again, this sword handles beautifully. I absolutely love the way it moves around. It has just the right amount of tip control and presence and forward weight that it helps you in the cut, but it doesn't feel like it is dragging you through the cut. But it is also super nimble. I could easily do a double cut with this if I was good enough to do it. The agility and speed and performance, this thing is outstanding, and I'm just gushing here because wow, is it ever good. So let's go ahead and compare it to the Principe, which is probably the most iconic 18C on the market. So just a quick comparison of the blades. Hopefully that gets on camera. You can see the Principe definitely starts considerably wider, but once you get to the point of center of percussion, right where you want to cut, there are about the same width. This has less profile taper through the first 2/3. This has considerably more. So the Principe, when I picked this up, I'm immediately struck by the extra weight here. This is a considerably heavier sword, and a lot of that weight is actually in the hilt. It's got a very robust grip that's a little bit wider than my taste would be. I really like the way the grip locks in my hand in the Sterling Armory, but the entire hilt feels heavier, and that's to account for the fact that this is a wider, beefier blade. But if I pick it up, when it's first, point of balance looks like it's right around the same place. Maybe a little bit closer on the Principe, but 1/2 inch difference maybe. When I'm moving this one around, I feel a little bit slower with it. The point of balance being very close to the guard means you can absolutely pivot it quickly and adjust your cut, go for a double cut, that kind of thing. But it is definitely a heftier sword. It's got quite a bit of weight on the Sterling Armory, and that slows me down a little bit. But it's still also a very nimble sword. I can absolutely put the tip where I want it to without much difficulty. It is absolutely usable one-handed, but the weight is definitely starting to fatigue. It's going to start fatiguing me a lot quicker than the Sterling Armory, or pretty much any army sword for that matter. It's a big, powerful sword, but it does move very well. It just moves a little bit slower in my hands than the Sterling Armory does. So yeah, I picked the Sterling Armory up, and immediately it's like, wow, that's a considerably lighter sword, which feels like it has just as much authority in the cut and just as much agility but more speed. And the hilt feels considerably lighter than the Principe does. More of the weight on the Sterling Armory feels like it's right in the base of the blade as opposed to the hilt. It's a very minor difference, but it is noticeable. And I just really love the way this one moves around. So bottom line, well, you already know what I'm going to say here, right? I don't think it's any surprise that I think this sword is worth the price I paid for it. I would not have made it my competition cutter for 2 years if I didn't think that. In addition, I reviewed a bunch of Chris's work, and they are all outstanding swords. So that's what I want to talk about again. Rather than focus on this sword, yes, this sword is worth the price. If it was the asking price that I think it would be of $1,300 to $1,400, that's what I think this kind of sword would cost from Chris these days. It would be worth that price. But I've said this before, Chris Fields doesn't get enough recognition in the reproduction market. His reputation is definitely growing, and you're starting to see a good number of his swords make it into cutting competitions, and he deserves that. His swords are outstanding. Some of the absolute best swords in my collection are ones he made. Combat Con is coming up in a few weeks, and he mentioned in one of his sword chats, which, by the way, his channel is linked below. It's Sterling Armory's channel. Check that out. He mentioned some of the swords that he was hoping to bring to Combat Con, and I don't remember any of them specifically, but there were a couple that sounded really intriguing. So I wouldn't be surprised if I had come home with another Sterling Armory sword. And that's saying something because, God, I love his swords. I have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of his swords, if I'm counting right. That's a lot for me to have from any one maker, and I want more. I love his swords. If you have a chance to check out Chris Fields' work, you should absolutely take that opportunity. He goes to a number of in-person events and tries to take swords to them to sell. And I highly recommend, if he's going to be at an event near you, check out his work. His swords all have a unique look and a unique feel, but wow, are they ever good. I love Sterling Armory's work, and you should too. And that's going to wrap up this review. Thank you for watching, and until next time, Alien 2'd out.